You start the new story with a person who is in a relationship with his wife by force, and he says to her, "Well, that's true. Look how excited you are when your husband, my love." And she took the shout to him, and she says, "Stop." And when he tried to accept her, and he says to her, "I love you, Renee," she crossed him in his lips, then said to him in anger, "I hate you, William Vuitton, and this anger." And he continued to do what he did, and he treated her with violence. At the time Renee took it, she says to herself, "He took everything from me. He killed my mother. He's my enemy." And here we go back to the events to find out what happened to her in the kingdom of Bachgen in 385, a strong monarchy in the heart of politics. With the deterioration of the health of Dasmund Bachgen and his illness, the problem of his caliphate caused a stir in the political field. Many nobles raised their hands to support the first prince. The successor seems to have been appointed. The princess and her entourage raised their flags in the light of their decision. The monarchy is in danger. The battle of bloodshed began. And here Renee was reading all this. Then she said to herself, "Nevertheless, this story has nothing to do with Countess Louboutin. And this is a village that looks out of the window." And she says to Louboutin, "A village far away, in the outskirts of the kingdom." This is boring. The king's anger has not reached him, and the only independent state in the kingdom. And suddenly the maid said in a fit of rage, "What a surprise!" And here Renee looked at her as she described it and said, "The lovers are full of love." And here the maid said to her, "It seems that Mr. Orpheus has really arrived." That is why Renee felt happy when she saw him calling his name Orpheus, and he was also happy when he called her name Renee. And this is clear from his eyes that he loves her. And here she said to herself, "This is our land." Then she went to him and embraced him happily and asked him and said, "Why are you here early? Our time has not yet come." And Orpheus said, "I am here early to see Count Louboutin." That's why Renee was worried. She said, "Oh my God, what's wrong?" But he smiled and said it was a secret. And she started laughing when she saw a scar on his forehead. That's why she said, "Oh my God, look at that. You have a scar." And here Orpheus looked at her in embarrassment. Here he put his hands on hers and he said, "This is true. Does it suit you?" That's why she looked at him in embarrassment and she smiled and said, "Yes, very much. I feel like I'm really a citizen of Bhutan." And here in happiness he said, "Oh, Renee." But suddenly the maid interrupted them and she clapped and said, "Well, well, the maid is waiting for you downstairs, my lady." Then she looked at her and said, "Shouldn't you hurry and go downstairs before that nobleman's head falls?" And here Renee laughed at what she said. Then she said goodbye. "Well, I'll be back soon, my prince and princess." She said to her, "Take your time and enjoy yourself." And Renee went with Orpheus. Then when the evening was over and they were together, Renee said to him, "Because you have to go back to her palace. I can't believe time has really come to say goodbye to you." And here Orpheus said, "I feel the same way." And here she hugged him and she said, "Imagine if we could spend the rest of our lives together without ever saying goodbye." Orpheus was ashamed and said, "Oh, Renee." Then he said, "I have something to tell you about it in this box." And suddenly he took out a ring from his pocket and said to it, "In the happiness of Renee, will you marry me? Even if the season passed and everything in the world changed, let's stand by each other, steadfast and upright, in this place and on this earth." And here Renee looked at him in amazement. Then she embraced him with happiness, and she said, "I don't know what to say. Oh my God, I am very happy, Orpheus. I will make sure that you never regret becoming one of my people, Liberton. I love you, Orpheus." And here Orpheus said to her in happiness, "No matter what happens, you must not let your heart tremble ever. Renee." Then she got on the carriage to return to her palace, and here she remembered her conversation with Orpheus, when she said, "Oh my God, we must get the approval of our parents." And Orpheus said, "I think so too." Therefore Orpheus said to him, "Wonderful." And here she began to laugh, and she remembered that. And she said to herself, Orpheus was always fully prepared. And here she arrived at her palace, and she looked out of the window and said, My steadfast land will always remain as it is, side by side with the person I truly love, so that my dream of being together forever. On this most special day in my life, I fear that this day will be the most miserable in my entire existence. That was beyond my ability, and this happened when she returned to her palace, and she found him burning, so she said in shock, What is all this? And suddenly, when she found her maid running away in terror and fear, she went to her and called out to her, Amélie. And here she turned to her and cried and said, Ah, my lady. And here Renée asked her and said, What is happening here? Are the others well? Where are my parents? But Amélie began to cry and said, Ah, my lady. And here Renée was shocked. When Amélie continued and said, The master and the lady could not escape. They are still inside the palace. So Renée quickly turned to the burning palace, and she went in and did not care about the fire, and she called out to her parents. Then she began to say to herself, Is it possible that they are in the office at this hour? The hot fire is burning me. I must find them quickly and get them out of here. And I went in more, and she called out to them, Mom, Dad, where are you? And suddenly I was shocked when she found a person holding a sword full of her father's blood, and her mother, the dead on the ground. So in shock she said to herself, What? What happened here? What happened here on earth? Then she looked again, and here she continued and said to herself, Is it possible, Renée, that I run away from him as fast as you can? Then I go out and ask for help, and here I look around and look at this person. And she looks at him and says to herself, This big fire, maybe people are lying. But my body can no longer gather any strength. And suddenly a burning piece of wood fell on it from the ceiling, and she fell and lost consciousness. And when she woke up, she found herself in a strange place, and she was sweating and saying to herself, What is this place? Where am I? Then she got up and took a look around her. Then she tried to get up, and she said to herself, It is certainly not in the palace of Leipton. What happened to the fire? This is not the right time to meet like this. But it suddenly fell, and she said, Why is there water here? And suddenly I imagined that there was a fire surrounding it. And here she remembered the day of the fire in her palace, and the sword full of her parents' blood, and the face of the person who did this to them. But suddenly a maid came and looked at her in tension. And she said, Oh my God, my lady. And it is clear that she did not wake up from the day of the fire in her palace, and killed her parents. And the maid completed, and asked her and said, Are you okay? And here Renée said in amazement to herself, Are you saying my lady? And here Renée did not answer her and said, Maid, oh my God, it seems that you are still weak, which causes you to collapse like this. And here Renée said to her, Wait, did your lady say now? And suddenly a person came behind her, and he covered her and said, If you stay like this, you will catch a cold. If you stay like this, you will catch a cold. And here, when Renée looked at him, she felt nervous and said to herself, It must be this man who was in the fire the day it happened. He killed my parents. And here this person smiled at her and said, I was very upset during the 2 weeks of your conflicts. I was afraid that I would not see my wife again, and here I was able to meet him. And she said to herself that he was Duke William Wotan. Then he hugged her and said happily, As it seems to us lately, I can share these words with you to congratulate you on becoming the Duke of Innersan Photon, my lady Renée. And here we know this person well. He is Duke William Photon, Duke Pietro, also known as the prince's friend. And this person is very famous, to the extent that his name has even reached the area of Libot, which has been missing for 6 years. He appeared out of nowhere, declaring himself to be the missing heir for a long time to the Machinon family. In order to support the Prince of Duke fell back to life, and restored his position in addition to that. He had no reservations about resorting to brutal methods and tactical plans if the prince's orders were. The young man who was sitting in the seat closest to the princess in his childhood is actually my husband. And here, she took a collapse, breaking everything around her. Then suddenly she stopped for a moment, crying. Then she continued to break things. And here the servants were standing outside her door, and they listened to her in anxiety. And she took Renea to judge her, and she said, "I was on the verge of losing my mind, according to the strict rules of the class society. The countess could not refuse the offer of the duke. While I was in a state of delirium, the marriage between me and the duke was legally recognized. And this means that he forced her to marry him without knowing, while she was in a state of loss of consciousness." And she continued and said among the society, "There were rumors about the duke, who found a woman and became infatuated with her. And the story of a romantic love was covered in a photographic book. And yet, for the Liboton family, their marriage was caused in the alliance and they became speechless.